David, thank you. The man convicted in a Halloween murder of a 9-year-old girl more than 50 years ago is back in court today seeking his release.
That murder in Fond du Lac County shook the community at the time. Gerald Turner, who is now 75 years old, completed his prison sentence back in 2018, but continues to be held at a supervised living facility after prosecutors convinced a judge he is still dangerous. Jason Zimmerman was in court today. He's live in Fond du Lac with the latest on that. Jason.
Cammie, this hearing today was for a judge to rule on a motion filed by Gerald Turner's attorney seeking a summary judgment, which would avoid a full trial, allowing for a jury to decide whether or not Turner should be released back into society. This type of request is typically granted as part of a pretrial motion when there's no disputed factual evidence in a case, allowing one party to win and avoiding going through the full trial process, which can be costly and time-consuming. The judge today, though, denying that request, which means the proceedings will continue to decide whether Turner is released back into society. Turner is known as the Halloween Killer for the murder and sexual assault of Lisa French, who was out trick-or-treating all by herself in 1973. He did not speak during today's hearing, and Turner's last request for release back in 2022 was also denied. He is due back in court for further proceedings leading up to a potential trial on March 12th. Reporting live in Fond du Lac, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.
Jason, thank you. When we come back, new details about a person of interest